It's the biggest Woj Bomb ever, and the last one, sadly. Are we staring down a future where everybody has a GM?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. My name is Isaac Shade. This wonderful gentleman to my side is Mr. Andy Patton, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch of the day. To get all that you need to know, listen free to every episode on listen ad-free to every episode on Amazon Music. That's how that goes, right, Andy? I know how to say words.
Nailed it.
Special shout out to all you everydayers joining us and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord, where baby stuff is heating up as we get closer and closer to November 4th. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Andy, wild and wacky news that came out on Wednesday. Woj, his final bomb is the news that he is joining St. Bonnie's as their general manager. And so we're going to talk about that, but kind of big picture, really what that means for college basketball at large. And then, perfectly enough, we've got our A10 preview coming up for you. I love the synergy. Honestly, Woj announced the news when he did on our behalf, Andy. I think that's what happened.
Really nice of him to do.
It really is, man. What great alignment. So A10 preview, we're going to talk about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar joining the A10 along with his head coach, Josh Schertz. We'll give you our predictions, our tiers, major storylines, all of that coming up. But Andy, let's start with the big Woj Bomb. The man is leaving, and we're going to have to get our NBA draft early knowledge from somebody else now.
Yeah, this was a crazy story to see this kind of pop up when it did on Wednesday morning. It's one of those things where he's an alumni of St Bonaventure. He's been a passionate fan of the program for a really long time. He's been a donor. He's been just involved with St Bonaventure, and he's kind of credited his fandom of St Bonaventure as part of the reason he wanted to get into this industry, wanted to cover basketball professionally. So for somebody who has been one of the most, well-known figures in the basketball media space to want to take this step back and kind of give back to his alma mater instead of just financially, which is what he has been doing in the past. I mean, he's got a huge contract from ESPN, has been, making a lot of money doing what he does as a newsbreaker. Him and Shams Charania have had that rivalry for a long time, but to see him kind of be willing to take this step back. And I think one thing that stood out to me is this doesn't seem like an easy job in the sense that it's not like, when coaches retire and they get like consulting gigs, and those aren't necessarily always easy, but oftentimes they're kind of cushy gigs. And like, this is not that. This is a job that's going to require a lot of research, a lot of, dedication, a lot of, long nights, long hours or whatever, but it's so much easier than the job that he's currently doing. And I think that says a lot about just how difficult working in the news breaking industry is. And as for somebody who is making the kind of money that he was at ESPN to be like, I'm going to take a very large pay cut and go work for my alma mater and do hard work, do a difficult task, and especially, a task that doesn't have a lot of, you're not basing it off of anything. He's the first person to do this job at St. Bonaventure. He's one of the first people to do this job, period, just in general, and to be willing to take a risk like that, to step into an industry that obviously he's familiar with as somebody who's covered basketball for so long, but this is still a pretty new avenue. And I think it's really cool to see him do this. I think it's cool for St. Bonaventure. I think it's cool for the Atlantic 10. And I think it's cool for college basketball. This is still a very new industry, and having somebody as high profile as Adrian Wojnarowski willing to step into that role. Again, it's good for him and his work-life balance and his family, but it's also really good for the sport. And I'm excited to see how this comes together for him and for St. Bonaventure.
Yeah, I mean, it's really neat to have somebody at St Bonaventure being one of the trailblazers of this enterprise coming alongside head coach Mark Schmidt here.
Mhm.
Going to be very interesting to see that synergy and how that plays out. But Andy, to your point of this being a pretty new thing, CJ Moore, who writes for The Athletic, has already done all the research for us.
Yeah.
Right now, from his research anyway, there are only 12 schools at the high major level that have this role. And now Woj becomes just the third one at the high mid-major level, if I can put it that way, meaning like A10, Mountain West, and AAC. And so as of right now, if CJ's research is accurate, there are only 15 such people at the high and high mid-major role, which is pretty interesting stuff. And I think before we get, Andy, to the big picture of it, do you think, just at the St Bonaventure level, do you think this is the type of move and role that can help them be ascendant at or near the top of the A10 at an annual level?
Yeah, I do. And I think it'll be interesting to see why, if that makes sense. Like, do they get better recruits and have more success specifically because of the work that Wojnarowski is doing in terms of, researching players and making connections and that kind of stuff? Or do they get a bump because of the added TV? More people are going to watch St. Bonaventure. More people are going to follow the team because they know Adrian Wojnarowski. And if he's tweeting about the team and he's talking about his job and talking about the players, like, he's got this massive following. So I don't think there's a lot of like high school players or even college basketball players who are like, well, I wasn't going to consider transferring to St. Bonaventure, but now I will because Woj. Like, I don't think that's going to happen very often, maybe occasionally, but I do think that his presence is going to help make more people interested in watching St. Bonaventure. And I think that's going to have a positive impact on the program. But outside of that, I think just having somebody in this role is going to help. And I think that's kind of more the big picture side of the conversation. But this is an area where, coaches are struggling to continue to do all the aspects of their job that they're expected to do: win basketball games, be a leader of men and help get guys to graduate and all those other aspects, deal with the media, things like that, sponsorships, fundraising, boosters, all of that stuff, and also be, navigating 1,500 players in the transfer portal every year. And I think having somebody who's going to help take a huge part of that off of your plate and, narrow the list down to here's 100 guys, here's 50 guys, whatever, whatever specific things they're going to ask him to do. Right now, one team in the A10 is going to have a guy doing that. The other 14 teams are not. And there's no way in my mind that does not give them an advantage until the other teams catch up.
Yeah. And look, I mean, the Bonnies have been on the come up since it was earlier in the 2000s, where they had 5 straight seasons of single-digit wins. They've been playing much better in the past decade or so, and I think this is an opportunity to really cement themselves, along with like Dayton and VCU, who seem to pretty perennially be up at the top. And so, man, that's going to be really interesting. Andy, I was thinking about this. As this role continues to grow and more people see the good of it and the win of it and feel like it's worth the financial resource investment in it. Here's the question I want to pose to us both. By the start of the 26-27 season, so basically 2 years from right now, what percentage of Power 5 programs, let's assume the Pac-12 hasn't come back to that status yet, will have a GM on staff?
I would say 90+%. I mean, I think honestly, it's going to be, if there are teams that don't at that level, they'll probably be in the process of hiring for that position. I think it's at the power level outside of, the Big East, most of those programs are going to prioritize hiring this position for football if they haven't already, because, you're dealing with 100+ scholarships for football. It's a much more intensive ask. Obviously, you have more coaches, but you're still going to want somebody in that role. But I think that the basketball side of things, you're going to start to see these roles become commonplace. And I think it should. And I do think Woj does help with that. I think having a high profile person doing this role, regardless of what program it's at, I think helps kind of put it back in the national conversation. More people are going to talk about it. More people are going to be curious about it. And I think more programs are going to start to realize the benefit that this kind of position can have. So by 26-27, I'd be pretty surprised if there were more than a handful of power conference programs that don't have somebody in this role. And the ones that don't are probably going to be teams that are either significantly focused on football and haven't ever really put a lot of attention in their basketball, or like I said, teams that are in the process of hiring, because I think it's just going to become a normal position that college sports programs, particularly basketball and football, have on staff just going forward.
Yeah, I was going to put it at 85%, but I think you're probably closer to the correct ballpark answer there than I am. And what's interesting to me is you mentioned how it's probably more needed for football because of the bigger rosters. But that means that every single selection for our basketball rosters are that much more important. And so, you know, I think I could make that argument as well, as like, because every person on your roster matters in a more significant way, it's like all the more so let's get after this. What I'm really curious to see, Andy, is, you know, I think about at the professional level, when we think about the GM head coach relationship, usually it's like, I'm thinking of the movie Draft Day, where Kevin Costner's like, look, I'm building this team. You just got to coach it. Whatever that dude's name is from, I can see his face. I can't think of that actor's name. Anyway, it's like, that's the relationship at the professional level. I feel like this is going to be a little bit more flipped, where coaches will say, all right, here's what we need. Here's our approach to this. And these are the kind of kids I need you to go look for, whether it's in high school or the transfer portal or whatever. And it's probably like the GM is in on those meetings with the entire staff. And I think it will be more collective at the collegiate level, but that the head coach will be the one that is really probably laying that groundwork more than we see at the professional level.
Before we move on, I just want to read this quote here from Dru Joyce, the new head coach at Duquesne. And we're going to be talking about him taking over at Duquesne in a second. But he was asked about Woj joining the Bonnies, and he said, Woj, he's been around the game. He's an alumni, so he has pride and passion. I believe he's going to put his best foot forward. Hopefully he does a good job and not a great job. And I thought that was a humorous way for Dru Joyce to handle this, and leads kind of perfectly into our next conversation, which is the A10 2 years ago was a single bid league. That was the first time in nearly 20 years that the A10 didn't put multiple teams in the big dance. Last year, kind of the only reason they did was because of that Duquesne team that managed to sneak into the tournament, steal a bid by winning the A10 conference championship. But we're going to talk about how the A10 does seem to be moving in the right direction after bottoming out a couple years ago, and whether that trend is going to continue. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Isaac, heading into our A10 conference preview. And like you said at the beginning of the show, it's really nice timing to have this Wojnarowski conversation happen as we get into talking about the A10. They were the planned conference preview for this episode, so it kind of gave us an extra storyline, a major storyline to talk about leading into this conference preview. But there's some other exciting stuff going on in this conference. We'll talk some coaching changes, a big one obviously at St. Louis with Josh Schertz taking over that program, bringing Robbie Avila along with him from Indiana State. But I think one of the big things we've seen in the A10 is that this conference has so traditionally been one of the few non-power conferences to put multiple teams in the NCAA tournament. The Mountain West typically does, the American typically does, the WCC oftentimes does, and the A10 is kind of one of the only other ones that regularly is a part of that conversation. And 2 seasons ago, they were a one-bid league, and it was the first time, Isaac, since 2005,
Sheesh.
that the A10 was a one-bid league. In 2023, it was the first time since 2005, 18 years. I guess 17 if you take out the year that the tournament didn't happen, but still an incredible streak of success for the A10. Last year, they rebounded. They did get 2 teams in the tournament. Duquesne stole a bid, like we mentioned, but they had multiple teams that had 20-plus wins. I think they had 4 teams in the NIT. So even if they might have only gotten 1 last year had Duquesne not done what Duquesne did, but we are seeing the conference kind of start to move back in the right direction after kind of bottoming out what it seemed like in 2023. And we got 11 coaches who are new since the 21-22 season. So majority of these programs have coaches who haven't been there for very long. And I think we're starting to kind of see those coaches get a little bit more comfortable. As with any mid-major conference, navigating the transfer portal is a challenge. And the A10's not bleeding players the way that some of the smaller major conferences are, but it's still an adjustment that they have to make. And I think those changes are starting to kind of level out a little bit. And I expect that we're going to see the A10 continue to be one of the premier non-power conferences in college basketball.
I agree with you, Andy. I mean, early on, it seems like unless something wild just happens on paper, I fully expect this to be a multi-bid league this year, and not in the same way that it happened last year. Like, I have a hard time seeing Dayton not make it, VCU, probably St. Louis, assuming that Robbie Avila does what we expect him to do, and we can get beyond that. But that's 3 teams that I feel like have right out of the gate very legitimate expectations of making this thing. And so I feel like we should be taking steps back in the right direction and not just by the skin of the teeth, right? It could be 3 or more teams making it this year. And so I'm hopeful for that, just as a kind of purist and traditionalist. I'm like, man, I like it when the A10 is solid and good. You and I were just looking back at KenPom data and stuff from years ago. At the beginning of the KenPom era, there was a couple of years where the A10 finished ahead of the SEC one year in 97, ahead of, what do we say, the Big 12 in 98. And so, I mean, obviously we're not going to get to that level right now, but I think we are trending in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about 11 new coaches in the last couple of years. 2 of them are coming in this year. And I think that's one of the big storylines. Obviously, Josh Schertz coming from Indiana State. They were tremendous last year. A lot of people were kind of surprised that Schertz, for lack of a better word, settled for the job at St. Louis. I think there were some people, Darian DeVries coming from the same conference. He gets the job at West Virginia. So I think some people thought, maybe we'll see Josh Schertz get a power level job. But St. Louis is a traditionally very solid program, and I think this is a really fun fit.
Last year.
Yes, not last year. And I think bringing Avila with him, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And that's one of 2 coaching changes, the other one being Dru Joyce. We mentioned him earlier, taking over at Duquesne for the retired Keith Dambrot. Joyce is a close friend of LeBron James and the James family, played high school basketball with LeBron. And that kind of leads to what would have been one of the most interesting and fun storylines of the A10 and frankly, the entire college basketball season. It was rumored. I don't know if it was just a rumor that people connected the dots on it or if there was actually some smoke here, but Bronny James, before he declared for the NBA draft, before he kept his name in the NBA draft, he also entered the transfer portal. And there was some rumors. What if he were to go to Duquesne to go play for Dru Joyce, somebody he's known pretty much his entire life, basically his whole life? That would have been a really fun story. Duquesne would have offered Bronny a chance to, not necessarily feel as much pressure as being in the former Pac-12, Big Ten at State at USC. Like he didn't look like a Power 5 starting guard as a freshman. I think that's a reasonable take about Bronny's performance, but maybe he would have been able to kind of shine in a different role at Duquesne. I wish it had happened. I think it would have been fun. I think Bronny needed more seasoning in college again. This is not a hot take. I think most people feel even more strongly about it than I do. But I think I would have liked to see what Bronny could have done in the A10 and just how Duquesne would have handled having that player on their roster. I think it would have been a really interesting storyline that I'm sad we didn't get.
Yeah, I am too, Andy. But you know what? Bronny spoke it into existence years ago, and he was not going to let that go. So fine, whatever. We've been deprived of another year of Bronny. Andy, for those who are unaware, let's just remind folks of the A10 membership. I'll go alphabetically here. Davidson, Dayton, Duquesne. We got some D's. Fordham, George Mason, George Washington with their recent nickname change, LaSalle, Loyola Chicago, who has been in the A10 now for a couple years. Rhode Island, Richmond, 3 Saints, Bonaventure, Joes, and Louis, or Lewis, because, whatever, UMass, and then finally VCU. But a note on UMass, this is their last year before they're going to head off to some action ahead of the 25-26 season. So just keep that in mind.
Very quick, Isaac, before you move on.
Yeah.
UMass moving to the MAC from the A10 saddens me greatly because it's clearly a football-focused move, and I get it. I don't want to pretend I don't understand it, but it is taking a step down basketball-wise. It's just sad to see a program be willing to do that. I wish they could have kept their basketball in the A10, but alas, that is life in the college football-focused world of conference realignment.
Did you hear that, Andy? I think that was the sound of Marcus Camby and John Calipari sobbing gently into a tissue. Andy, last year, Loyola was the regular season champ, kind of rising back up. They had not been as good the year before. It's good to see them rise back under Drew Valentine. And then Duquesne, who we have been talking about, obviously was the tournament champ, finding their way in. Andy, going to be really interesting to see what happens. We had those two teams, Dayton and Duquesne, in the NCAA tournament, but 4 NIT teams, including VCU, making to the quarterfinals, along with Loyola, Richmond, and St. Joe's. We'll make our tournament predictions coming up here later on in the show. But Andy, I think that probably about wraps it up for big storylines here, unless you got anything else.
No, I am ready to make our predictions for this conference.
Oh, baby. Then we got to talk about our bespectacled star, Robbie Avila, as the favorite for the A10 Player of the Year. And can he, in the midst of doing that, lead the Billikens to the big dance? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Look, you've heard us talk so much about FanDuel this summer, America's #1 sports book, and we've been telling you this summer about a boost or a bonus that you can get daily from FanDuel. Well, got something a little bit different for you this time around. Right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. And look, the opportunity ends September 22nd. That's just a couple days away. So get in on this right now. Andy, how about some odds? National championship. We got some big boys at the top. UConn, Duke, Kansas, all plus 1,000. Alabama plus 1,300. Scroll all the way down to Dayton, plus 15,000. Why not take a flyer on it, folks? It'd be fun. Or how about Wooden Award odds? Our guy, Robbie Avila, oh man, plus 10,000. He has the best odds of any A10 player for that. Why not take a shot on that? If you want to get in on any of this or more, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Andy, it's time for some predictions. We're going to go A10 first team, player of the year, transfer of the year, freshman of the year, DPOY, coach of the year, and then we'll give you some tiers for how we think these teams slot out. Andy, why don't you start with your first team A10?
Yeah, and one thing we'll acknowledge here, and we'll acknowledge this for all of the conference previews that we do, we always pick 5 players for the first team. We're not going to do any 10-player first teams. We're not doing that.
Honestly, that's why the Pac-12's dead, Andy, is because
that's what killed them. That must have been it. But we also only ever pick 1 player per team. So while I think even in the A10, I think with 15 teams, there are still a couple of teams where I was like, I could pick 2 or 3 guys from this team, but we're limiting ourselves to just 1 per team. So here's my first team here for the A10. Robbie Avila, not a surprise there whatsoever at St. Louis, transferring over from Indiana State. He was first team Missouri Valley Conference last year. I got Max Shulga, who flirted with Villanova. And more than that, he was enrolled and was getting ready to move to Villanova and decided, I actually don't want to hit the transfer portal after all. Returned to VCU. He was a first teamer last year. No reason to think he won't be once again. Speaking of first teamers last year, Eric Reynolds from St. Joe's did it last year, expecting him to do it again. My last 2 picks, I got Posh Alexander, Butler transfer, formerly at St. John's, now at Dayton for his final year of college basketball eligibility. I got him on the list. And then Des Washington from Loyola Chicago. Des Watson from Loyola Chicago. He was a second teamer in the A10 last year. I expect him to take the leap and be a first teamer this year.
Andy, I have no idea why I just thought of this, and this is not the time for this discussion. Dayton feels very Big Easty to me at some point in time. All right.
I think in the future, yes.
Yeah. I don't know why I just thought about that. Anyway, Andy, we have 3 of the same 5. I've also got Avila, Shulga, and Reynolds on my first team, so I'll just give you my other 2. The Dayton player I went with was not Pasha Alexander. In fact, there were multiple Dayton players I thought about for this, and I landed on Nate Santos, returning forward for the Flyers, who was 3rd team All A10 last year. And then I also went with George Mason's Darius Maddox, a guard there, played 3 years at Virginia Tech. This will be year 2 at George Mason. This dude, Andy, is a career 41.9% from 3 and a career 84.3% from the free throw line. Had about 14 points a game last year at George Mason. I think he takes another step forward this year in year 5, one of those last ever COVID eligible players. Andy, out of all of that, who are you going with for your A10 Player of the Year?
Yeah, I'm going with Avila. I mean, I think obviously you any player who's transferring up, I suppose in this case, you wonder if they're going to be able to replicate their production, but I don't think there's a huge difference between the Missouri Valley Conference and the A10. And I think Avila's skill set is going to translate at that level. He's playing with the same coach. I think that helps a lot as well, because Schertz was really invested in making sure that Avila was able to get the touches necessary to put up the numbers that he did last year, which for those who need a reminder were incredible. He averaged 17.5 points a game. He averaged 6.5 boards. He also averaged over 4 assists per game, shot just under 40% from 3. We're talking about a 6'10" big man who can space the floor. He can distribute the ball. He's a decent rebounder. He's a high-level scorer. I don't expect him to take any kind of drop moving to the A10. And if he puts up numbers anywhere close to that, and if St. Louis jumps in the standings, which I expect that they will, I think he's going to be the guy taking home that trophy next year.
Andy, I thought long and hard about this one, almost went with it. Also, did you notice that you said Josh Schertz was invested in? Man, I'm so proud of you right now as a corny dad. I'm actually going to go with VCU's Max Shulga, who will be in his 2nd year at VCU. As you said, we thought he might have landed in the Big East, but coming back. And I just think he's just a prime candidate to me to take an even bigger leap and really hop up. And so won't be shocked at all. And I think it's a great pick with Avila, but I got some Max Shulga vibes for this thing. So doing that. That said, though, I think the transfer of the year is probably a no-brainer for both of us. Do you have who I have?
Yeah, I think it's got to be Avila, and I think it's pretty clear it's going to be him. But I did have a couple honorable mentions.
Let's hear it.
I'm actually going to mention Pasha Alexander in another spot later, so I'll skip him for now. But another player that I don't know if he's not going to win it over Avila, but Katie Johnson is now in the A10. He's going to play for George Mason this year. I'm really interested in how this might go. For those who need a refresher, Katie Johnson spent the last 3 years at Auburn, was a freshman at Georgia prior to that, has kind of saw his production dip every single year he's been in college basketball. He's not a particularly productive scorer, but he can get hot in a hurry. I think he's going to have the keys to the kingdom at George Mason. I think they're going to give him a lot of freedom, and I'm interested to see if he could go out and put up like 17 points a game. It might be a pretty unproductive 17 points a game, but that might get him at least in this conversation. And more than anything else, I'm just interested to see how he looks at a different level out of the SEC.
Andy, I'm going to go for an honorable mention transfer with Zed Key coming over from Ohio State, staying in Ohio, going to Dayton. So we'll be playing along with Pasha Alexander and with Nate Santos, who we mentioned earlier. And so, Dayton, it's got some intriguing pieces.
Looking at freshman of the year, this was a tougher one to pick. Obviously, not a lot of top 100 caliber freshmen who are going to the A10 right now, but VCU did land a top 150 prospect in Luke Bamboy. He's a 6'10 center. He played at Compass Prep High School in Arizona, one of the West Coast basketball factories. He had offers from a lot of high-profile programs. Houston had an offer out on him. So did SMU and Miami and Iowa and Georgia Tech and Cal. Offers from a lot of good programs. Ends up going to VCU. They lost some of their production in the front court, graduated last year. So I think we're going to see Bamboy play a decent role right away as a freshman. And I think that's enough to have him have a serious consideration for this award.
Andy, I'm going to the bottom of the conference. I don't think LaSalle's going to be very good this year. Spoiler alert for our tiers. But give me Deuce Jones, who is a 6'2 point guard out of Edison, New Jersey. I think he's going to do some stuff for the Ramblers. No, the Explorers, excuse me. Who's the Ramblers? I'm
Loyola
getting
Chicago.
Thank you. Good grief. Just all these guys going on journeys. You know what I'm saying? Ramblers, explorers, it doesn't matter. But Deuce Jones, watch out for him coming out of LaSalle.
Defensive Player of the Year, this is where I'm going to have Posh Alexander. And it was not a hard decision for me. No. Posh Alexander spent 4 years in the Big East, and he led the conference in steals all 4 years. There's no reason he's not going to have similar production in the A10 where the guards are not quite as good top to bottom. So don't be surprised to see Posh Alexander average 2.6, 2.8, 3 steals per game, win Defensive Player of the Year. Book it.
My only question is why Tony Bennett didn't get him down at Virginia. It feels like the clear and obvious choice. No, don't overthink this. Posh Alexander is your depoy.
Let's go Coach of the Year here. I'm going with Billy Lang at St. Joe's. I think St. Joe's is going to be a top 3, top 4 team in the league. I think they're going to compete with Dayton, VCU, and St. Louis at the top there. Lang has in the 4 full seasons, not counting the COVID-shortened year, Lang has gone from 6 wins to 11 wins to 16 wins, last year to 21 wins. That is incredible consistency, 5 added wins per year. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm predicting they're going to win 26 games this year. I haven't looked at their entire schedule, but if they win 23, 24, 25 games, maybe they were 9-9 in the league last year. If they are over 500 in the league, I think there's a real chance they do that. Eric Reynolds is back. Xavier Brown is back. They added a transfer from Rutgers, Derek Simpson, who averaged 8 points per game last year. Give me Billy Lang taking home this award for St. Joe's.
Andy, I'm actually going to go with Josh Schertz because St. Louis, man, was struggle bug last year, man. 13-20 overall, 5-13 in the A10. Prior to that, Coach Ford had 4 of the last 5 seasons were 20-win seasons. The only one that wasn't was the year after COVID when they only played 21 games. So, it's like, come on, what are we doing? And so I just really think it's weird, as somebody who lives in the state of Missouri, it was odd last year. People were coming to me knowing that I do college basketball, like, what is happening with St. Louis? And so I just think Schertz comes in. Obviously, when you have a talent like Avila, I think that helps propel them. And we know how this goes a lot of times. It's either people vote for somebody that was supposed to get like 30th in their conference and finishes 25th, or the shiny new thing on the block that's nice and people are going to vote for it. So that for me is Josh Schertz. Andy, let's wrap this up with quickly getting through our tiers. I'm just going to rock through it, and you tell me if you got anybody that you're super out on or think I'm an idiot for saying it this way. Tier 1, for me, I've got VCU and Dayton in a class by themselves atop the A10. Right behind them, though, is this conglomerate in Tier 2 of St. Louis, St. Joe's, George Mason, and Loyola Chicago. Andy, the Ramblers. I wish you'd gotten that right earlier. I'm just kidding. That was me. Tier 3, I've got these Bonnies and their new general manager and Duquesne. I might be a little high on Duquesne. That's one I keep questioning and flipping. Tier 4, this is my biggest tier. George Washington, UMass in their last year, Richmond, Rhodey, and the fighting Steph Curry's Davidson. Davidson's another team that I can't quite figure out what they're going to be this year. And then Tier 5 down at the bottom, mentioned it earlier, LaSalle and Fordham. Though that's my tiers for the A10.
I think that's pretty good. I'm with you, and I'm not sure what to do with Davidson. I think you have him in the right spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if they make both of us look silly this year. I think the only thing I might do is I might move George Mason to Tier 3 with St. Bonaventure and Duquesne. And it's not even like that I think George Mason's going to be bad. I just think that I feel more strongly about St. Louis, St. Joe's, and Loyola being in that tier. And that kind of the Tier 3, the Bonnies, Duquesne, and George Mason are all kind of wild card teams, and I feel like they kind of all belong closer together. I could see them all being top 5 in the league. I could also see them being, in the 8, 9, 10 range as well. So it's going to be a really fun year in the A10. I think there's a lot of teams that are going to kind of be able to compete for those top 3 or 4 spots. I think spots 4 through like 9 could go a lot of different directions.
I agree. And you know what? I appreciate your George Mason movement. I'm in on it. Way to go. Let's change it. Andy, quickly, get us out. Regular season conference tournament champs in the A10. What you got?
Dayton's going to win the regular season. I think their rosters, they're a well-coached team. I think even losing Deron Holmes, I think they're still going to be in that conversation. Conference tournament is always a crapshoot. Give me St. Louis. Why not? Give me St. Louis. I think Josh Schertz is very unhappy. He missed the NCAA tournament last year. So is Avila. They're going to find a way to ensure their spot in the dance. So give me Dayton winning the regular season. Give me St. Louis in the conference tournament. They're both going to make the NCAA tournament as well.
I was going to go VCU regular season, but Dayton as my conference tournament champs. But St. Louis is hanging around with both of those as well. So I don't think either of us are very far off from each other there.
That is going to wrap it up for us today, folks. I love these conference previews. They are so much fun. It's always a good opportunity for us to dig in deep, look at all the newcomers, look at the new coaches, look at how things are shaking out in each of these respective conferences. We're going to do quite a few more of these between now and the start of the college basketball season. We're also going to continue our team preview series, as you folks have been seeing. We've been doing quite a few of those episodes throughout the last couple of weeks as well. Really looking forward to continuing to dive deep on each of those perceived top 25 teams, as well as the high major and a few of the fun mid-major conferences for those previews as well. Folks, have a fantastic weekend. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until next time, as always, peace out.